creating curiosity by asking better questions. This is Shed Talk. Jonathan Perkins, TEDx Calgary, the things you know that you don't know. Jonathan Perkins, thank you very much for joining me on Shed Talk. And I've known you basically for about 2 weeks, and I knew I had to get you on here.
Well, thank you for having me here. It's going to be a lot of fun. Just a good conversation.
And it is. And you know, it was interesting because we had met and I did a phone call to you regarding TED Talks, TEDx's. And I thought I know everything. So in this whole application of what we call Shed Talk is the things you know that you don't know. And the whole concept was basically, what is a TED Talk?
Well, you know, for us as TEDx organizers, we're distinct from the main TED layer. So what happened in 2009 is that TED started this initiative called TEDx, and the X in their vernacular stands for an independently organized event, which for us, we thought that's a little bit dry as a definition. So for us, the X is about exploring and experimenting, and often, just like on a treasure map, an X marks the spot where a great idea occurs. So we're that layer outside of the main TED that allows us to bring TED-like conversations to local municipalities like Calgary. And, you know, there have been several organizing teams in the city, but our role is really to amplify the concept of TED. And we're often sometimes even referred to as campfire type of conversations. That's language we've used, so that you take, you know, the magic of the TED recipe for a talk, and you apply that in your local area. And for us, it's about cultivating those local voices and those local ideas. So we use the TED recipe for talk time, which is a maximum of 18 minutes. We use the entire tool set that they have about how we prepare speakers, et cetera, to be effective in giving their talks. But it's us as local organizers being able to independently find ways to amplify and cultivate the voices we think are important for our time and place.
So what would you consider, like when I get into this, just to get to know a little bit more, what is the recipe for a TED Talk?
Well, the recipe is, for us especially, is to get an idea, find an idea that people are going to be able to lean into. So that idea is sufficiently unique, and it's provocative and opens up doors. And when we talk about the difference sometimes between ideas and stories, I mean, I think what we've seen is that a lot of TEDx talks, or a lot of people who are wanting to become TEDx speakers, are looking to tell an important story to them. And we fully respect the power of the story to the individual. But we see our role in curation is to be able to take an idea, and the TED mantra is ideas worth spreading, right? And so there's a qualitative dimension in there about why does this idea matter to us? Why does it matter to the participants in our event? And how can we make that idea accessible, especially if it's a complex idea, accessible to a lay audience, right? So if I'm talking to a surgeon, right? We had an amazing heart surgeon from here in Calgary, Paul Fadak, and you know, we're asking, how do you become a really effective surgeon, right? Because we don't get a lot of practice time when you have to open up somebody's chest and work on a heart, very complex organ. You're sometimes even stopping the heart for a certain amount of time. And so it's not about how do you do heart surgery, but how do you become masterful in the process of learning to do that type of surgery. And so it's a fine line between the idea and how we actually transmit the idea out. So we weren't, with Paul, asking people to go and do heart surgery, but we were encouraging them to pursue mastery in whatever their discipline was. And how do you do that? You observe, you practice, and quite often you have to be able to share the idea. When you teach the idea, you have to know the idea cold, right? You can't just sort of go, I think I know, right? You really have to be that masterful person to go through all parts of that.
So, as a master in the TEDx, and how long have you been a member with TEDx right now?
We've been organizing for 15 years now. This is our 15th anniversary year.
So, would you consider yourself the master of TEDx right now?
No, I think we're advanced practitioners. I don't know that there is really an absolute master. I have the great fortune to have an amazing co-founder. We came out of Leadership Calgary, and Raheem Sajjan and I have been that pair who have been bouncing these ideas back and forth for a number of years. And it's a great confluence of strengths, right? Both he and I are intensely curious about ideas and about people. And when we're trying to bring that idea out from folks, I think we've applied our own masterful approaches to do that. We've had more than 150 speakers in TEDx Calgary over the last 15 years, even with the hiatus of COVID. And I think those stories have been immensely powerful. Like, we've reached probably about just under 1 million people in the amount of views and other things that we've done, and the encounters we've had with Calgarians in our events.
Are a lot of the speakers out of Calgary?
The majority are, right? We've, some of our farthest flung speakers have come from the UK and parts of Asia. But part of our curation process is to try to focus first and foremost on Canadian and, as much as possible, local voices, because Calgary is actually one of those interesting cities that most people don't see the sublayers. I mean, we've got multiple universities, we've got amazing STEM talent in the oil and gas sector, the energy sector. And quite often when people think Calgary, they think horses and stampede, and that's great for one part, but Calgary has also actually had a really strong history of being an ideas engine, obviously in the oil and gas and energy sectors, but also in agriculture, increasingly in computer sciences and everything else. We have world-class artistic institutions here, like Arts Commons and the Philharmonic and the ballet, etc. Right, and so that's part of what we want to bring out for people.
And you're bringing everybody together all around Calgary and getting to know what Calgary is all about and everything.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the things that I sort of playfully, years back, I'd never been to Cirque du Soleil in any other city, and I go to Cirque du Soleil here. And we started TEDx Calgary after that experience. And one of the things that really struck me as a metaphor is when we hold one of these events, we want the idea circus to be recognized, to be in town, right? Like, we're putting up the Grand Chapiteau, the equivalent of the big circus tent of Cirque du Soleil, for ideas. And we're actually trying to create a space where people know that this is a place of flow for ideas, that this is, you come in here, ideas are welcome. There's no idea that's out of bounds. There's respectful boundaries about how we discuss ideas, but you want to share an idea, this is the place to be on May 10th of this year, as an example, because this is where it will all converge.
And it's interesting, you've said it a couple times, and the one time you just mentioned is about flow. Mm-hmm. What is the power of flow? Because you've said it a few times, mm-hmm. and I'm leading into the next part, but it's interesting because you've used that word a few times. And so I just kind of want to know, tell me a little bit about flow.
Well, flow is an interesting concept. I mean, it's been with us all along, but it was unearthed in a lot of the research literature in the early 1970s. You've got Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is the guy, more syllables and consonants in his name than we can count. But he's the one who really sort of identified this place of a really unique place of consciousness that is associated with peak performance, right? We just feel and know that we're in that special spot. And, that concept has evolved over the years. He's given a TED talk about it and, written a number of different books. And so the concept of flow is a really interesting place where we're hyper aware what we're doing, but we're also setting aside a lot of the distractions that tend to surround us in our lives. We go into this really powerful place where ideas connect in our heads in a new and different way. Or if you're a high performance athlete, you find that mix between challenge and skill. So in one of his books, he has this interesting diagram that says, you know, we all have places like deep relaxation where we might inadvertently use the term flow. But that's not what flow is, right? Flow is actually, I'm trying to achieve something, I'm trying to do something, and I get into such a place of concentration and connection that time falls away, distraction falls away. So in our work, like when we're sharing really neat ideas in a conversation, we're in flow, right? For us, right? It's a back and forth, and we're trying to elevate one another's ideas. Last year, our event was used the theme yes and, right? So I can acknowledge, yes, that's a really amazing idea, and here's something else I'd like to add to that. The other piece in our event theme this year is connecting the dots. So on top of flow, one of the things that we observe is that a lot of people do that flow activity on their own, right? It's a solitary exercise. But the power of the ideas is when we connect the dots between different disciplines, and we connect your flow to another person's flow and build something even more powerful. So that's part of how we practice flow ourselves. Raheem and I, when we're ideating about speakers and other things, the street lights turn on and we're like, wow, it's been several hours that we've been at this. And there's also that moment where you get into, for our participants at our events, we divide our time between speakers on the stage and the interactions of the participants, because we want participants to make connections between speakers, between the ideas that we've shared, and ultimately, hopefully, adopt some of those ideas and take them forward themselves.
And you wouldn't necessarily, it's not considered a networking event, but more of a creative process to be, as with flow being connected, that you're dialed in. Because a lot of people would look at flow as being, I just can't believe how dialed in I am right now.
Yeah.
And in business, they'd say, you know what? I'm in the social pipeline. I am going through the pipeline right now that I'm hitting it. Where other people would, all of a sudden, you're sick for 2 weeks and go, man, I'm off the social pipeline. I can't get in. I got to get back into that groove. I got to get into that flow.
That's right.
And being present at zero. I am present right now because I need to be present to make sure that I can change the world, whatever that would be.
Mm-hmm. Well, in our event, we also use flow as a bit of an umbrella framework, and connect the dots as an umbrella framework, because we're gonna both celebrate and explore the concept, and not all of our talks are necessarily going to touch on the psychology of flow, that the way that the original exam or people who are exploring that on a research level are doing it. We're also using it the metaphor, for example, of in this place and time for Calgary, we're facing another season of drought conditions, right? Already the province is starting to put into place what are some of the plans that we may have to reduce water intakes from energy, for example, in the northern part of the province, or agricultural water rights, and all the complexities of our watershed. Like, we're a river city. Calgary couldn't exist without the Bow, as an example. So there's a metaphor for flow of water as an essential piece of our life and our health as a city. When we talk about all the different climate challenges we have, we talk about the flow of energy. We need to flow energy out of this province to recoup the benefit of what we have underground. We also have a strong history. Me, and I won't say I'm the strong history, but all the people who have come to Calgary, who have flowed from other parts of the country to here, to create that really intriguing mix of people that we know from uncovering some of these voices. lots of Calgarians just don't realize how much idea talent there is here. And part of our beauty is being able to expose them to that, right? I know you've had Dave Kelly on the show, and he does some work with one of an organization we work with, Calgary on Purpose, and he has this beautiful metaphor like, did you know that was your neighbor, right? And because until we get into a public space, you don't know that the person 2 doors down is maybe one of Canada's foremost cancer researchers, for example. I didn't even recognize that for a long time that one of our speakers in our last event, his son and my daughter go to school together, right? And so, Dr. Doug Mahoney, and this is a guy who's engineering responses to some of the nastiest cancers we have. And I'm like, that's really cool that we're neighbors in that metaphorical sense.
And it's funny how you live in the burbs, okay, and urban and sprawl and everything, and how we all seem to all put ourselves into that separate area, like in Mackenzie Town or where it doesn't matter, to Shaughnessy. You only live and breathe in that area versus grow and get yourself out there to introduce yourselves to more people in the city of Calgary alone right there. And as I'm going to say the word grow and flow all the way through that to understand it. But it is interesting how many people in Calgary that are absolutely brilliant people and brilliant speakers. How do you take a brilliant speaker and cultivate them through TEDx?
Well, a lot of our focus is actually first and foremost on the idea, as I said earlier. And we're not expecting the person with the idea to be a fully formed speaker. That's where our coaching process, myself and Raheem, he's coached probably 2/3 or more of our speakers through. And a lot of it's about, tell me more and give me a sense of how that matters and how that connects. And it's helping that speaker draw out the idea. And there's a bit of a metaphor when we say it's a recipe. The beauty of recipes is that you can add and delete ingredients. You can change the cook time. You can experiment with them. Unlike formulas, right? I don't think a TEDx talk is a formulaic thing. It's more of a recipe that says, here's some really great ingredients, and this is how we work with those base ingredients to make sure that you're telling your idea in a powerful way. We only have 18 minutes, absolute max, right? We don't get to publish the talk if we're busting that timeline. So we actually focus on how do you tell that idea in maybe 15 minutes or maybe even just 6 minutes, right? One of the funniest TEDx talk or TED Talks is, he might have been a TEDx guy, but he showed people how to actually dry your hands with a single paper towel instead of continuously. And that was a 5-minute talk. Absolutely amazing way to get the idea across. And it didn't take 15 minutes to describe it. And, so it's light in terms of you're not sitting through an hour-long lecture. You're sitting through a 15-minute recitation and powerful story around the idea, why it matters, why this person is able to tell us about that idea. And I think most powerfully, the invitation to share the idea, right? I'm not just up on stage to say, look at how great I am. I'm actually genuinely wanting to share my idea with you. And, we've given them the recipe to do that in our coaching process.
So how would you, we talked earlier about the why. Everybody goes, the world's about whys. So when you talk about TEDx, it's a huge why. So these people that are coming there as a speaker, and you have to look at them and ask their why, and they have to tell you what their why. How hard is it for them? Because you just said right now that this guy who's coming up there has to give. He's giving back. Okay, you have to be there. That you really want to be there, not because it's ego, because you're truly putting it out there because you need to change something.
That's right.
Or you want to change someone's life.
Yeah.
How hard is it for them to answer that?
I think when most people who are ready to give a TEDx talk are ready, they know the why. They're able to articulate that in their own head. We help them put that into words and expression that others can grasp onto, right? So it's a little bit like Velcro, right?
So can you give me an example? I'm trying to really
Sure.
dig down onto that.
Yeah.
Is people say, well, here, I got a great talk and I'm writing my speech, da, da, da. And then you're saying, well, make sure you have your inflections here, your deflection, make sure that. Give me more of an example of how that is.
Well, there's speaker voice about how we actually deliver a talk, but there's that chain of ideation that allows a speaker to start out to say, here's the idea I'm trying to share with you and why I think you need to know it. And that creates a critical lean in for a person, right? I always think if you've ever done speed reading and so on or looked at that, I always thought speed reading was moving your eyeballs faster or your finger faster. And it's actually critically thinking about what you're going to read. And just like what we're trying to do with our speakers, we're trying to give people the hook that allows them to lean in. So when I tell you what my idea is and why I think it matters, we want you as a participant to start thinking, okay, tell me more. I want to hear how you lay this out. And so part of our process is a bit like the old clotheslines that used to be on pulleys. You hang a sheet. Here's the idea. Here's how I'm going to give you some concrete examples of that idea in action. Here's how I'm going to share with you a methodology for us to explore that idea in more detail together as a bit of a trailhead. We use that metaphor a lot, right? You go on a hike and you arrive in the parking lot and you look at the trailhead for the hike. That doesn't mean you've gone on the hike and you've had the experience, but it does set, that's going to be an interesting twist and turn as we get halfway up. And it gives you a little bit of a preview, and it incites you to want to dig into the idea, not just sit back and watch it like it's a television show. We want you, and we work with the speaker to craft their talk to make sure that they're trying to take you through that journey of from the original why to how can I actually add to this at some point.
Has there ever been a speaker that you've listened to, because you've been doing this forever, that is just that lean in moment, that whoa, wow, and then you go, that was why I am TEDx Calgary.
There's been a number of those speakers over the years. I've always said to folks, and we actually have this on our website, about what to expect. And we tell people that you're going to come to hear the speaker that you thought, I'm going to come and see Kevin someday, maybe, right? I'm coming to see Kevin. But I'm also going to experience, because you're now not self-selecting your own talks. Like when we watch a TED or a TEDx talk online, we come in and we go, what am I in the mood for right now, right? And so I pick my talk and I curate it myself. When we're in the event context, we're curating that experience for you. So we may have that talk that you knew you came to see. You're going to experience a talk that you didn't even know was there, right? Because it's maybe the next talk in the sequence, or it's one of the talks in the event. And then hopefully there's going to be a talk that pushes your boundaries a little bit, right? Again, you may at first have a negative reaction to that idea, because just like our bodies have defenses against viruses and bacteria, we have defenses against ideas too, right? And that's our orienting story. Oh, I'm going to discount that because it doesn't come from a source that I either know and trust, or it's pushing on my concept of what society is about, or business, or whatever. And some of those are the ones that I think are the most powerful ideas, right? They're unexpected, and they challenge us to look inward and go into a bit of a state of flow and force us to reconceptualize some things. Good example for me was back in 2014, we had an event that was curated by my colleague Raheem called Truths. And we had everything from Canada's chief statistician, who had been arguing we need to do the full long-form census, to musicians and painters and other things. And in that lineup was a woman by the name of Beverly Jacobs, and Indigenous, and she stands up. And as part of her talk, she says, I'm looking at colonizers, an audience of colonizers, right? And that was new language for many people in 2014. And the reason she was saying that was because she was working on the missing and murdered Indigenous women files, right? And she was going, if 1,600 kids and spouses and family members from your neighborhoods started disappearing, and there had been no tangible, for that community, no tangible follow-up or real commitment to investigating, you'd be upset, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and so that was like a punch between the eyes, right? Because I've got 2 teenage daughters, and I'm going, yeah, I would be up in arms. We would be up in arms over that, and it was one of those ones that, and I had actually had the advantage of years earlier in grad school being exposed to some of the first residential school settlement processes when I did an internship with a mediation and arbitration firm. But I hadn't made the leap. I hadn't made the connection to the stories of, the Highway of Tears and all that sort of stuff. And so when you get into that moment of unexpected that prompts you to think in a radically different way, those are powerful ideas being shared in the moment. And at the time I was a police commissioner for the city of Calgary, and I went to the next police commission meeting and said, hey, Chief, what's with this? Where do we stand as a city on this in terms of files that we haven't closed and other things? And so you get those moments in an event where you're not curating it, we're curating it for you. It's like a book or an experience that we're taking you through. We're trying to get your neurons to fire in new and different ways. And yeah, if you come out upset, that's okay, because not all ideas are warm and fuzzy ones. Sometimes they're profoundly disquieting, right? And like that one.
That's amazing, and that's a great half story. And the only reason why I'm saying half story, because now the curiosity's there, is like, wait a second. Just listening to what you said about what did the commission, after you said this, what did they say after that? And I have to dig deeper into that, because now that the Pandora box is open and you've been there, what did they say then?
Well, it was, the service was very responsive to that. They had already started to look at that. They had recognized that this was an issue. And, the process by which any Canadian police service started to examine its own focus on how were they working with Indigenous communities, how were they following up on these cases, because interestingly, as an organization, our second event had a very interesting man, Judge John Riley, right? And he had been a circuit court judge who had served in Indigenous communities. And in his talk, you can go back and look at that online, he had actually said, I went in thinking I was going to go in and bust up a big set of problems. And that if I was just the tough judge who, did what I was taught to do in law school and taught to do as a judge, everything would be good. And he experienced the complexity is that, no, these are profoundly damaged and hurting communities. And the case that you think is one of domestic violence, well, we now know that comes from a long history of stored trauma. But it was his revelation. He said, I had to take on a whole different mindset. And we've seen police services respond to that. I mean, we just recently had a speaker from the Edmonton Police Service at our event last year around the George Floyd murder. And he goes, as a black man, chief operating officer for his division, he actually says in his talk, I had to take this to my chief and say, we need to do something tangible about this, not just lip service, but get meaningful in the community, right? And again, for I think our Canadian system of policing, we've had the good fortune that we don't just it's not elected police officers. It's a well-refined system with good civilian oversight. And so the response from the service was appropriate. And at conferences later that year, there was a lot of discussion across police services Canada-wide about how they would effectively respond to this type of issue.
It's amazing. And you think of all that, through the things we know that you don't know, through a TEDx talk that created curiosity for us to ask that question where I had no idea, and I'm thinking of this and go, that lean-in moment that had to ask a better question. So, Jonathan, another quick, what is your superpower?
I think my superpower is constantly asking why, right? It's one of those things as a little kid, I'd always ask, why is this? Why is that? And the fact that you voice that and voice that as genuine curiosity, I think is a superpower. And sometimes it's a bit of a curse. I was told by a colleague one time, may your children always ask you why. And I said, I think that's a blessing until you get to some of those difficult points where you have to say, because, but it's also, let's explore why together, right? And let's figure out what we don't know and what we might need to try to figure out in our state of flow, in our state of connecting the dots between disciplines, between the ideas we've heard, because we get into that really interesting state and flow where there's lots of different ways to get into it, but we have that profound moment where we're making connections we didn't even think was possible. So as an entrepreneur, maybe you're finding that gap in the marketplace. That's your next business. If you're a researcher, it's the question of something isn't connecting for me here. And so I have to go deeper, wider, talk to more people to figure it out. And in our standard daily lives, I would hope that people, if we plant the question why, when they're walking along the street, just don't pass by something. They actually stop for a second and say, why is that occurring? What can I do about it? And if they've been to one of our events, hopefully they know a talk that will help them to interpret that.
That is absolutely amazing. Jonathan Perkins, thank you very much for being on Shed Talk, the things you know that you don't know.
There you go.
And I think I learned something today, obviously.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now you know. Shed Talk.